So I often feel I have the privilege here, we have the privilege, whoever moderates the program, of spending a little time with the guests before we come up on the stage. And I wish sometimes that you all could be in that little room, but in a way I'll invite you into the room now by saying we were just talking about the fact that this crisis, as I said, has been going on for so long, and we have people here with so much experience. But one can get lulled, I think, or as a journalist I can remember being a little bit lulled, because we had so many periods where there was a flare-up of some kind. There were some belligerent statements from Pyongyang, there was a missile launch or something, and within a few days things seemed to have calmed down. I want to start, if I can, with the gentleman to my right and immediate left who have really, as I said, been in the trenches of this issue for a long time. And ask you, Mr. Kim, if I can start with you, what's different now on a sort of worry scale? In the last 10 days, has your worry ratcheted up, or are we still in one of these periods where you think all calm will prevail?
Well, as we are all aware, North Korea, they already made 5 times nuclear tests, and up to 4th test, the interval between the test was about 3 years. But the 5th test is made only after 8 months after the 4th test. The shortening of the interval means they are approaching the final stage of completing the miniaturization and also standardization of warheads, which means now they can easily load warheads into missiles. So that's why we are worried about that. And furthermore, they expressed their will to use these weapons. I hope it's just a rhetoric, but anyhow, that's why we are worried about. And the Korean Peninsula becomes much more dangerous than before because of this new development.
Because of the test or because of the delivery system?
Delivery system, both. Because they made progress, both in nuclear test and also delivery system. And the problem was the advancement and progress is, faster than we expected. So, we expected, for example, SLBM case, submarine launched missiles, we expected they will deploy it, they will not be able to deploy SLBM until 2020. But estimation now is much before than that, they will employ. So that's what we are really worried about that.
So Chris Hill, you certainly in your time as envoy who was dealing with this issue dealt with all kinds of I was going to say crises, but I don't even know what qualifies as a crisis now on the peninsula. When you heard the news 10 days ago, what was your reaction in terms of the same question I asked the minister?
I would agree with Ambassador Kim. I think we are in a different era. I think we're seeing a qualitative change in the crisis. In the past, the North Koreans would fire off a missile or even have a nuclear test, but you always had the impression of someone, some kid, banging the spoon on the high chair and, looking for recognition, looking for some kind of acknowledgement. It often happened when there were big events going on in the world and the North Koreans simply wanted attention. I think we're well beyond that at this point. I never thought I'd be sort of nostalgic about Kim Jong-il, but there was a sense that when Kim Jong-il was around, he kind of cared what the Chinese thought. He had this fantasy that somehow he could work in a way that there could be a U.S.-North Korean relationship. He seemed to be interested in that. I don't see any of that with Kim Jong-un. I see a testing program that has no symbolism to it, but is rather a testing program as many other countries would have a testing program that is a military, a program designed to test various military hardware. So I think we're looking at a country that really is interested in developing a deliverable nuclear weapon. We see the stages of this. we see that they seem to know what the challenges are. Miniaturization is part of it, turning a device into a warhead. Now we're seeing in this latest test of their missiles an effort to have more powerful engines. This is obviously aimed at at having an intercontinental ballistic missile. We see an effort to get away from liquid-fueled rockets. I mean, the nice thing about liquid-fueled rockets is they'd set them up and they'd spend hours and hours, putting the fuel in.
I didn't know there was a nice thing about
Oh yeah.
liquid-fueled rockets.
Compared to where we are now. So if they're successful with solid fuel, they can put them up 1 second and shoot them off the next second. So we have a tremendous challenge, and at the same time, we have kind of, there was more sort of rhythm to our relationship with China in the past than there is now. And right now, the U.S. and China have just kind of not found those patterns of cooperation that I think we need. The good news is I think the ROK and the U.S. are in a sort of positive frame of mind together. We're working on things together, and that's helpful. But obviously some of the things we have to do, like putting up this terminal high altitude area defense, otherwise known as, we were told no acronyms, so I didn't mean to spring AKA on you.
I didn't think of AKA as an acronym.
Otherwise known as a missile defense.
Right.
And then, of course, this has gotten the Chinese attention. So we've got a lot of diplomacy to do. But I think really time is running out, and we should stop thinking in terms of time being on our side.
We've put a lot on the table there, and we've come back both to Kim Jong-un and the Chinese relationship. I do want to just hone in a little bit on the delivery systems without maybe getting too technical, and maybe Chung-in Moon, you can weigh in on this. Here's Ambassador Platt, by the way. Nick Platt, are your ears burning? That's our former president, Nick Platt, arriving. Nice to see you.
Yeah. The original China boy.
It's not meant to be a dramatic entry. It's just that downtown is hell.
Yeah, well. So we were also just talking about former Defense Secretary Bill Perry, who also was deeply engaged in this issue. He said something recently that was really ominous, I thought, but in a way it's what you've just been saying, Ambassador Hill, which is, quote, "It's too late on the nuclear program. That is not going to be reversed. Concentrate instead on the delivery systems." Do you agree, first of all, too late on the nuclear program? And if so, what does concentrating on the delivery systems mean as a matter of policy?
I didn't say it was too late. I just want to be clear about that. But you asked me to describe the mess.
Yep.
But eventually we'll talk about the solution.
Yes, we will.
Let me elaborate in this way. In order for North Korea to be a nuclear weapons state, North Korea should have a nuclear warhead. Now, it is believed that North Korea has acquired about 20 nuclear warheads. And second, the North Korea should have delivery vehicles. Now, it has a short-range Scud, intermediate range, Nodong and Musudan. And most recent Musudan testing was based on solid fuel. And they shot about 4 Musudan missiles in East Sea. Accuracy was so high. All those 4 missiles fell into the 1 kilometer's range perimeter. Therefore, North Korea has delivery vehicles. More than that, North Korea has submarine-launched ballistic missile. What North Korea does not have is a long-range strategic bomber. Other than that, North Korea has at least, all kinds of ground-based missiles and submarine-launched ballistic missile system. Third, North Korea undertook 5 nuclear testing. Okay, and North Korea proved that now it has really formidable and credible nuclear bombs. And as Minister Kim pointed out, North Korea has made nuclear bombs smaller, lighter, even standardized. They can produce in mass. Therefore, in other words, if you look at all these kinds of things, North Korea has become very powerful and threatening nuclear power. But North Korean behavior is one thing, but another one is our government position, South Korean government position, American government position, Japanese government position have become much stronger. They have been now relying on, they will be strengthening sanctions and pressure against North Korea. Now we are talking about preemptive strikes on North Korea, where our government is trying to introduce kill chain, which can, kill chain means it's kind of deterrence measure. If we detect North Korean intention to launch missiles, we would make preemptive strikes on those nuclear missile sites. And more than that, and we also, our government has declared massive punishment retaliation on North Korea if North Korea really launch nuclear missiles. Therefore now we have really, we see kind of game of chicken. No way out, because there's no place for dialogue and negotiation. That makes me really worrisome on the current development on the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, in other words, you have sanctions and pressures, you have deterrence, and also evidence through the THAAD, coming in a high altitude in the aerial defense system. It's a defense. Therefore, you have a sanction, deterrence, defense, but no dialogue and negotiation. There's no way out. That makes us very, very fearful of current development on the Korean Peninsula.
Okay. Yonsei, I want to come to you in a second. I see you making a lot of notes, but can I just come back to, you had it sounded like a visceral reaction to what Bill Perry said, but Minister Kim, so this notion that the nuclear, the opportunity to reverse the North on the nuclear front is over, is basically what he said. Do you agree with that?
I can't agree with that, because our goal is to dismantle all nuclear programs in the North. So we cannot agree with that.
I think you got to make a distinction between denuclearization of North Korea on the one hand, and on the other hand is preventing the worsening of the situation is another. Therefore, what Bill Perry is talking about is that North Korea has acquired nuclear weapons. That what we have to do is to prevent the things get more worsened. That is what he's suggesting. Therefore, there is room for diplomacy. Okay, but it would be extremely difficult for us to reverse.
Well, you mentioned delivery system, and just Professor Moon explained in detail. But my worry is at SLBM, because submarine-launched missiles, yes. And if North Korea achieves full combat capability of SLBM, it may weaken the security commitments by the US to Asia, particularly to Korea and Japan. I worried because the SLBM can be used as a second strike method. So what we are really worried about is that so long as we can maintain our Korea-US alliance, I don't think North Korean nuclear and also delivery system can be a game changer there. But they may weaken our US commitment because, as I said, SLBM can be used as a second strike method. Particularly conservatives in Korea and Japan, they are worried that when something happens, US is ready to implement the first strike because still SLBM is there. They can destroy all the missiles on the land. But for the fear of the fact that Guam can be hit by SLBM, our worry is the US may be reluctant or hesitant to use first strike. That's what we are really worried about that.
Did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think the North Koreans have made visible progress on their nuclear forces, and I think the development of submarine-launched ballistic missiles is an example of this progress, as is the solid fuel rocketry. So I think time is running out, but I dispute the notion that we have to accept North Korea as a nuclear state and accept that they will inevitably have this nuclear deterrence, I think we need to prevent them from having this nuclear deterrence. Now, I have never been one to call for regime change. It would not be a bad day if we woke up and found they had regime change. I mean, I have no problem with it, except that I don't think a strategy should be based on hope. I think we need to take a much more in-depth look at what could be done to slow down this program. And we have some experience with Iran. I think we have to have a much more consequential discussion about whether there are technical things that could be done to slow down the development of this program. The key here, and this is, I think, a good lead up to Ms. Yoon's analysis on China, the key here is building some trust and building some patterns of cooperation with China. It is not enough to say China needs to solve this. This is they created this little monster. They need to take care of it. That's not going to get us very far. Yeah, and by the way, that's bad enough, but when you hear the Chinese say that we need to solve it by canceling our exercises with South Korea or whatever, that's not going to solve it either. But I do believe that a better U.S.-China relationship, frankly, a better pattern of cooperation among the five parties is the way to address this. And I might add that a lot of people look at the six parties and they say, well, maybe that's the problem. I wish it were. I wish I could say 7-party talks, 8-party talks, 66-party talks would solve this problem. That's not the issue. The issue is the five of us need to get together with an approach to North Korea. And I don't think wagging our finger at them seems to work. I don't think sanctions. I'm all in favor of strengthening, 2270? I'm all in favor of that, no problem. But I think we have to look at some other approaches here because they are experimenting across the range of equipment, and we need to take this on. And I think one of the things that worries me about China, this is really the buildup for you now, one of the things that worries me about China is there seems to be a kind of lack of consensus within China on what to do about North Korea. I mean, you talk to the business community in Shanghai, they don't even want to hear the name North Korea. They throw them under the bus. I mean, get rid of them. Hold your ears. You don't want to deal with them. But you hear security service people in Beijing with a somewhat different view. And I think China needs to understand this is a top quality issue that they need to deal with. And we need to understand that, yes, we want China to improve its human rights. Yes, we want China to improve its protection of intellectual property. We want them to do a million things, frankly. And don't forget the South China Sea. But, preventing that little neighbor of theirs from going nuclear should be, in my view, number one.
Okay, so first of all, apologies, Yun-sun. We've taken this long to come to you, but yes, that was a mighty buildup. And it is interesting. We're just, a week away from a presidential debate. And I would...
Well, a debate between candidates for president.
Okay. We try to be apolitical, but in this event the other night on the U.S.-China relationship, you may check it out at asiasociety.org. Our distinguished guests, Winston Lord in particular, check it out. Not that apolitical. Yeah. Anyway, what I was going to say is that I would venture, assuming North Korea comes up, who knows, that the answer on both sides, I would suspect, is going to be some form of, well, we have to use our leverage against the Chinese. We have to pressure the Chinese. It was certainly the answer in all the slew of debates in the spring. It seems to be the reflexive answer, not just in debates, but in public discourse generally. And there was a moment, I think, about a year ago, right, where it seemed like there was a little bit of, on the U.S.-China front, a little bit of hope that maybe this was an area of some agreement. Now, whether it's because of this missile deployment that has so inflamed them, I do have a couple of quotes here that don't sound too promising, but curious to know your response. So our Defense Secretary Ash Carter said last week, immediately after the launch, I would single out China. It's China's responsibility. Whereas in Beijing, a lot of talk about, no, it was your deployment of those missile defenses that drove the North to do this. And one Fudan University scholar who said the test was, quote, the direct product of the U.S. deployment. So what do you think of those comments? We're putting a lot in your corner here. And what hope for this? I mean, is it still a legitimate thing to say from the U.S. side, let the Chinese, we have to pressure the Chinese to make a difference?
It's certainly an easier solution to talk about, to blame all the responsibility on the Chinese and say, well, it's China's problem. China is the one who holds the key, without going into the deeper cause as for why China is behaving that way. So I agree with Ambassador Hill. It's not about the format. It's not about how many parties are involved. I think it's quite, well, to be honest, it's quite obvious that the essential problem is between U.S. and China. China is concerned that U.S. has a military alliance on the Korean Peninsula. If there is going to be a collapse of North Korea and unification of the Korean Peninsula, China's most immediate reaction is, well, there will be U.S. troops on our border. Mm-hmm. So without providing China an end game that China can aspire to, China is not going to cooperate with us on North Korea. They acknowledge that North Korea's nuclear development is a problem, but it's not the top problem for China because that privilege is reserved for the United States.
So I think I understand you, but that is, if you think about it from our perspective, and our perspective may be way off, it's a provocative thing that a nuclear neighbor, I mean, with whom you share a border, would be less worrisome than a neighbor in collapse where a lot of people may be coming over your borders, but also the idea that the United States would have that much more of, whether it's a presence or influence there.
I just add, the issue of state succession on the Korean Peninsula, I mean, I understand the idea that if China puts pressure on North Korea, somehow North Korea goes away, and I mean, I think that's a bit of a pole vault to conclusion, but okay. Let's assume they go away and then ROK becomes the state successor in the Korean Peninsula. And then China worries that there might be U.S. troops north of the 38th parallel or up on the Yalu River. First of all, I think it's important to understand the U.S. will not and cannot sit with the Chinese and say, we'll never put U.S. troops north of the 38th parallel. ROK, Republic of Korea, sovereign country. The minute the U.S. starts making deals with China on where within ROK we put troops, if any, by the way, that's an interesting.
That's a question.
Have you visited our Congress lately? Anyway, so we don't want to be put in a position of sort of negotiating over the heads, quite literally, of the ROK. What the ROK wants to do with U.S. troops, would they want us to remain? If they do, what kind of troops? Where would they be? That's a decision that the U.S. and the ROK need to make in the context of our alliance. I am sure that if the Chinese have some views on that, the ROK would be, and we would be interested in talking to the Chinese.
Okay.
But if I were the ROK, my slogan would be, nothing about us without us. Which is an old Polish slogan, actually. But
Thank you for that.
the ROK and Poland have a lot of similarities. But so nothing about us without us. And so we cannot sort of tell the Chinese, all right, we'll do this or that, with respect to the U.S.-ROK relationship. I am sure, though, if China is worried about those things, they ought to talk to the ROK and talk to us about them.
Well, here's China's response. Let's say that hypothetically, China is indeed asking this question that if you have some grievances, you have some demands, you need to speak it out. Chinese reaction, because I asked Chinese officials this exact question, and their reaction is, well, we don't want to change the status quo. You want to change the status quo. South Korea wants unification. So you need to propose something that's acceptable to us. We're not going to come up with a price or a bargaining position for you to negotiate with.
But can I follow up to because you used a phrase, Yonsei, a moment ago. What would be an end game that the Chinese could aspire to? And that's a really interesting proposition. Is there, I mean, it's one thing for the United States to propose that, but what would be an end game that the Chinese could aspire to here?
The Chinese answer to that will be, we don't know, but we will see when we see it. We can
know it
decide
when
when we
we
see
see
it.
it?
Yeah.
Look, Korean problem should be done by Koreans. Okay?
Yeah,
None of
exactly.
American, none of Chinese business.
Spoken by a Korean, so
Let me, as a addition to her remarks, go back to Xi Jinping's basic policy on the Korean Peninsula. First, peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. Second, denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Third,
Now it has been
resolution of all the pending issues through dialogue and negotiation.
Yeah.
And Chinese government hasn't changed an inch of its position on those three principles. Okay.
No,
And
not, I mean, order has been changed. Now denuclearization.
no,
first,
no,
and
no,
then
no, 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 no. I do not agree with you. I was in Beijing just 2 months ago and had a long discussion on that topic. Three principles. And what Chinese are complaining is this: don't blame us. United States and South Korean government have not done enough. Chinese government has been urging, particularly when Chinese government agreed to push for the United Nations Security Council resolution in February. Wang Yi visited Washington, D.C. He made it very clear, okay, we'll agree with that resolution, but the U.S. got to talk with North Korea. The whole point is this: the Chinese leadership thinks that the United States and South Korea have not done enough homework for negotiation and dialogue, yet blaming on us. That is Chinese position, the way I read. I don't know whether I'm correct or not. I talked with some responsible people in Beijing.
I talked to the North Koreans 64 times. You think if I talked to them 65 times, we'd
It's going
have
to
that
take
moment
time.
where they hit the side of the head with the palm of their hand and say, now I understand what you're saying?
Yeah, you can do 100 times, 1,000 times.
I think-
You to get a
I don't
tangible result.
hold on one second. Minister Kim, you feel the
Yeah.
Chinese position has changed?
slightly toward that direction. But I agree with that. Professor Moon said Korea had not done enough. And also I agree with Ambassador Hill that I think we need more sophisticated and subtle approach to China. Just urge and urge, you should do this and this is not enough. Because we need to address some Chinese concern. So I didn't talk with my colleagues in the foreign ministry officially, but my idea is that because China is concerned about the third system in Korea, but the Korean government's basic duty is to protect our people and our national interest. So we should do that. But still, we have 1 year time until we deploy third system in Korea. So we can offer both after consulting with the United States first. If United States agree, then we can offer Beijing that within a year time, we give time limit to them. If you put pressure or just persuade, just let North Korean people come back to negotiation table for denuclearization. Then we can suspend our deployment of third system, because third system is because of North Korean missile and nuclear threat. So we can give task to China.
So how, let's assume we're in a negotiation here. So how do you think the Chinese would respond? It's an interesting proposition. The deployment is a year away, or almost that long. So there again, we get to the question of what would be an end game, at least on this narrow issue, that might be attractive to the Chinese.
Well, the Chinese proposition or counter-argument might be, well, even if we convince them to come back to the negotiation table, to what end? Do we really believe they're going to give up their nuclear weapons without the U.S. providing a security guarantee or security treaty?
We offered that. We'll offer it again. That's not a problem.
What is the mechanism and
What would they like?
that's up for negotiation?
Well, they got to put on the table. I mean, we put on the table our preparedness to have a security agreement on the Korean Peninsula. We put it all in. And the North Koreans said they wanted it until they saw it, and then they didn't seem to want it anymore.
That's where the Chinese proposed a dual-track strategy earlier this year after Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited. So what they are proposing is a parallel system of peace negotiation and a negotiation about denuclearization. I think logistically it's going to be very difficult to coordinate, not impossible, but it's going to be very hard. But like you said, the U.S. offered that we can have peace arrangement or peace treaty with them. Which one comes first?
The U.S. has no problem putting these elements on the table. We put them on the table. North Korea agreed to them. They also agreed to denuclearization, and we agreed on the joint statement. Now North Korea says they don't agree to denuclearization. We are not going to normalize with a nuclear North Korea. We're not going to do that. If they say, well, we will denuclearize in the context of you putting out your own versions of the peace treaty and implementation of the peace treaty, then we're in some kind of implementation. And that's a sequencing issue. That's not a huge problem. The problem is North Korea is not prepared to do away with their nuclear weapons, and they say this is part of their national identity to have nuclear weapons, and that's where we just part company. We cannot accept that.
I agree with you. I think that's the fallacy of the Chinese argument to begin with, that they argue that North Koreans want to develop nuclear weapons because they feel insecure. But in fact, there are plenty of other domestic political reasons for North Korea to do that.
People used to say Hitler was insecure, and that's why he attacked half the world. I mean, everybody has psychological trauma, but that cannot be the basis on which we can have an agreement.
Agree.
So I feel, although this is super interesting, we're wandering a little into everything that's wrong with every potential solution. So we're going to come to some potential solutions in a minute. But before we do, I wanted to ask, and I don't frankly know who has the expertise on this, you may all have a little bit about what's going on in North Korea itself. There's been, from those you talk to who have been in, first of all, one observation, and maybe a very simplistic one, is that in the capital at least, the look of the place, the goods on view have improved a great deal. There was an observation in the Wall Street Journal today by a scholar, and I don't remember his name, but it was on the front page saying that Kim Jong-un actually has proven himself, quote, a skilled dictator, in part for providing for some improvement in the quality of life, again, at least in the capital.
That wasn't Donald Trump, though.
No, it wasn't. I wouldn't call him a scholar. I think it was Daniel Pinkton, actually. But
Okay.
and his point was that he's effectively kind of having his way, not just locally, but with the international community. But I wonder, and also I guess it goes to the question of how good our intelligence is about what's going on there generally. I take it just down the table.
But I think our problem with North Korea comes from our underestimation of North Korean capability. Kim Jong-un's political entrepreneurship, North Korea's military capability. Okay, we thought that if we impose sanctions on North Korea would stop developing nuclear weapons and missiles. But despite our sanctions, they have gone into the much better and more in a position. That is one of the real problems. Therefore, we all expected North Korea would collapse very soon. But a lot of North Korean experts, particularly in South Korea, argue that North Korea will not collapse. Even if Kim Jong-un regime collapses, then military can move in, or party military collective leadership can move in. Therefore, there won't be any collapse of sovereign state called the DPRK. That is a real problem. Therefore, in other words, we do not know. North Korea is like a black box. But there has been some kinds of intelligence failure on North Korea. And also we have been doing so much whisper thinking on North Korea that North Korea would collapse very soon. But that has really changed our terms of negotiation with North Korea, which made the situation worse and worse. Therefore, my position is this: let us face reality. Okay? And then under that foundation, we got to talk with North Korea.
So Professor Moon just referred to it as a black box, and we only get whispers. You were foreign minister. It's not that long ago. How comfortable did you feel with the level of the information and intelligence you got, either then or now?
I don't want to show internal conflict between Professor Moon.
You already have.
But anyhow, our intelligence on North Korea is not sufficient. That's true. But he said failure, but I don't agree with the failure, but it's not enough. That's true. That's true. And because just one example, if North Korean leader passed away, then who knows? Only several people they know.
He was
So,
foreign minister when Kim Jong-il died.
so how can he know that? Because they are hiding the fact. So it's not easy to catch the correct information from North Korea, but we are trying very hard. And people are talking about the human intelligence there, but there's a limit there. So I think we need to put more assets on technical intelligence system now.
And what about just the circumstance for ordinary people? For years, another part of the paradigm was it seemed the country was always either in some kind of a famine or on the verge of a famine. You don't hear that much about that anymore.
Well, first of all, when I have the opportunity to agree with Professor Moon, I never let it slip by. So let me just say I completely agree with him on this notion that we can kind of turn some knobs and pull some levers, and the North Korean regime will collapse, and that's our policy. And our only problem is we've been unwilling to turn the knobs and pull the levers. I think the durability of state structure in North Korea may be much greater than we know. And I think Ambassador Kim is absolutely right. I don't think we know enough about North Korea. I will say that, as someone who visited Pyongyang a few times, you cannot judge that country by looking out the window of your car and saying, oh my goodness, they have bottles of vodka there or something, and therefore everybody in North Korea must have a bottle of vodka. I think it's a desperately poor country. And by the way, for everyone who talks about the, how there are tall buildings in Pyongyang, look at what's going on there right now with the floods. I mean, this is a country that, here we are, in 2016, and they still haven't figured out what to do with excess rain. I mean, we have these problems in the Mississippi, to be sure. When they have problems, their whole harvest is in danger. They have many lives in danger. They cannot manage it. They cannot manage sort of simple things that most countries have managed since about the Middle Ages. So I think we do have a country that is not doing what it needs to do for its population. That said, it's a very vertically oriented society, and I wouldn't look for it to just collapse some morning.
Yeah, I agree with Professor Moon and Ambassador Hill that it is unrealistic that we expect collapse of North Korean regime pretty soon, because they have their own know-how how to govern that country already for 3 generations there, and the system is more resilient than we expect. But one of my colleagues, my friend, he's professor of economics department at the Seoul University. He made a very interesting analysis. When not economy whole itself, but the price of main export items to China is good, North Korea always makes some more provocations. And in terms of that, Kim Jong-il is quite fortunate, since he inherited the power in 2011. Price has gone up. So thanks to that, and also they can earn $200 million US using their workers and working abroad. So thanks to that, for the last 4 or 5 years, they made a positive growth. Slightly over 1% or around 1%.
This worker abroad program, which I think is one of the efforts to tighten in the sanctions so that countries don't invite so-called North Korean guest workers. I think it's high time that was stopped.
Poland expelled
Poland expelled it. But from last year, situation has been a bit changed because price has gone down. Particularly, their main item, one of the main items is anthracite. The price has gone down, already halved. And they have 20,000 workers in Russia. And the value of ruble has gone down as well. And after the fourth nuclear test, there was a sanction by the United Nations. And the Korean government close to Kaesong Industrial Complex. They are losing about $5 million a month cash.
10 millions.
10 million.
Millions.
Yeah, 10
a month,
million.
yeah.
So I think economic situation becomes tight. And as the leader, he's already in the power for 5 years.
Right.
He needs to show his capability by improving the livelihood of the people.
So they're global economic
Yeah,
issues.
yeah,
Very
yeah,
easy.
yeah.
Blame the U.S.
Yeah.
So I want to, first of all, I want to invite everybody in the room and those watching beyond the room to at least start thinking about their questions. I did promise to get to, at least attempt to get to some, if not solutions, some levers. You just mentioned knobs and levers, Ambassador Hill, that may be worth going to. I've made my own little list, but maybe we can just go down the line and see whether any items on my list are palatable. And if you can just, refrain maybe from saying what's wrong with all these, but choose one or two or others that I don't mention that you think might be worth pursuing. Were you, any of you, now in ministries or positions to pursue these? Sanctions we've mentioned. Negotiations, whether one-on-one with the North, 6-party, 4-party, 66-party, I think you said, bilateral,
And
or
keeping
other
the door
formula.
open to negotiation, I think is very important.
Pressuring the Chinese. So-called secondary sanctions, which we haven't mentioned but has been talked about, meaning that if there are countries that are doing business, that you go after them. And then we also haven't talked much about military force, preemptive strike, that kind of thing. Yonsun, what, if any of those, or some you want to volunteer that I didn't mention, would you consider worth pursuing?
I think keeping the door open for negotiation is definitely the way to go. That's for the Chinese, that seems to be most feasible and most acceptable way going forward. Then, of course, in terms of the technicality of the sequencing, that's going to be a problem. And also, the end goal for that negotiation, is it preventing the situation from getting worse, or is actually to denuclearize North Korea? I think that's going to, for the United States, it's very clear, it's denuclearization. But
I hope that's for China too, though.
for China,
At least they've
that
said
is,
it.
well, they've said it, but whether in reality that's their priority.
You don't think they
is
care?
I think they care, but I don't think that's their priority.
And what's their priority?
The peace, well, the stability inside North Korea or the stability inside the Korean Peninsula has always been China's priority.
When I see my Chinese friends, I'm always telling them, you think North Koreans will not use their arms and arsenals toward China. That's not the case. They can easily change their gun point. And, inside their minds, the one who can threaten their regime survival is not the U.S., China.
That is our wishful thinking too.
No.
There
You
is,
see, throughout
that is
our
our
history-
government position. Okay?
No, that's not government position. That's
no.
that's history says that.
No,
We should have put
There
you
is
on
a-
separate sides here.
there is one professor, Professor Yonsei at the Chung-hwan University, quite polemical guy. He and I attended the same panel at the World Economic Forum, Davos Forum, and he was making really strange statements saying that, look, China has a nuclear Russia, China has a nuclear India, nuclear Pakistan. Having one more nuclear North Korea will make a big difference.
But Yonsei Tung, he suggested to make a military alliance with Korea as well. So how can we rely on his statement?
I promise that down the line, and I don't know if you, Ambassador Hill, want to look at that little diplomatic toolbox we put out there and see if anything appeals to you. Again,
So you mentioned sanctions.
negotiations,
sanctions.
pressuring the Chinese, secondary sanctions,
Yeah.
the threat of force of some kind, or the actual use of force in preemptive terms.
Well, I'm a little concerned about the secondary sanctions, which I understand you to mean this issue of if we find a Chinese firm
Right.
engaged in this,
You mean secondary
China
boycott?
gets sanctioned. And I think at the end of the day, we need China on our side on this issue. Now, I'm a little worried with what you've told me, but I'm going to ignore
That's
that
okay.
for the time being. I think if we're going to get China on our side, the use of sort of extraterritoriality is not a good way to the heart of the Chinese. So I'm a little nervous about the secondary sanction idea. I do think we need to have a much more serious and in-depth dialogue with the Chinese to determine what the future could look like and whether and what their real concerns are. So I think there needs to be a much, rather than repeating over and over our view of what China ought to do, I'd like to hear from the Chinese how they view the situation and what, if anything, can be done to alleviate some of their concerns. So a much deeper dive with the Chinese on these issues, and done in concert with the ROK, because the minute there's any mistrust between the ROK and the U.S., we've kind of failed in the mission.
But find an end game
That's
they
right,
like,
that's
maybe.
right.
Yeah. Minister?
Well, I think there should be some mix of pressure and also dialogue as well. So I think we are talking about regime collapse or regime change, but we should be realistic on that issue. So our goal of strengthening sanctions against North Korea is, I think it should be to bring them back to negotiation table with genuine wishes for denuclearization. So if we do sanction for the regime collapse, I think it's not realistic at the moment. Yeah.
But is there a sanction that you think right now, first of all, there are so many sanctions in place. Is there a fresh regime or even one example of sanctions
Well,
that might
sanction
you think, bring them
is a
back?
lack of will. Frankly, I'm sorry to talk about China again, but
Yeah.
it's a lack of will
Right,
on the part
right.
of China. They have leverages. So if they want to use their leverage, they can do that.
I think it's a lack of will, but also a lack of consensus.
Yeah, lack of
And I think
consensus, yeah.
China needs to show internal leadership on this issue. And I guess if you're in the Chinese leadership and you look at all your problems, maybe North Korea is not number one. But I think the Chinese leadership needs to understand that when we look at China and its inability to develop consensus, we see kind of weakness, which is not helpful. I mean, I've always taken the view that our concern is a weak China rather than a strong China.
Just related to the point that Minister Kim just mentioned about North Korea could potentially, there is always that possibility that it could use their nuclear weapons on China. And then naturally the Chinese will have the concern, if we put more pressure on North Korea, we really push Pyongyang into a corner.
Catch-22.
Then that will generate even more momentum for North Korea to use their weapons on China, right? So what is the incentive for China to do that?
So you would like to simply wait it out until you're thoroughly blackmailed by North Korea?
No, the Chinese
Is
will
that the
blame
st-
Americans.
Oh, well, that would be some comfort. So you're thoroughly blackmailed by North Korea, but you can blame the U.S.
The Chinese
I don't know if that works. I
No,
All right.
it's-
work so far.
Tom,
Professor Moon, you before we go to the audience, is there some out-of-the-box thinking that we haven't covered here? That,
for example, our government, President Park Geun-hye has emphasized the importance of sanction. I agree, okay, because North Korea violated the United Nations Security Council resolutions, okay, and our president emphasized the importance of defense through THAAD and Patriot system. I agree. She has an obligation to protect our people's lives and properties. Third, she emphasized the importance of deterrence, including proactive deterrence, meaning if North Korea shows any intention of attacking us with nuclear missiles, then would engage in preemptive strikes on North Korea. I all agree. But I would hope that she would add one more dimension. There is a dialogue. Then what would be the so-called game-changing point for the dialogue? I think China would agree on the issue of, for example, temporary suspension of ROK U.S. joint military exercise. Even Sam Nunn, in the Council on Foreign Relations report, suggested such a possibility. Okay, if that is the case, then China will not raise any opposition on our government position on sanction, defense, and deterrence. Therefore, my point is this: there got to be some mix. But I hope that the Seoul and Washington should show some effort toward the dialogue, and also we should put all the agenda on the table. Why can't we do that? Let us see. because our offer should be based on North Korea's reciprocal actions. If North Korea doesn't show any reciprocal actions, yeah, we can go much harder on North Korea.
I'm back to disagreeing with
Because your point, well, let me guess. I mean, your point is that we've tried this. Is that right? Or?
Well, yes, first of all, we do have the door open to dialogue, and we are prepared. You know, 6 parties is not some situation where everybody has to be in the same room at the same time. It's a platform on which you can do a lot of different configurations, 3 parties, 2 parties, 4 parties, etc. So I don't think there's a problem with dialogue. But I have a huge problem with the idea that the U.S. ROK alliance, which I think is utterly critical to ROK interests and frankly to our interests in the region, should somehow have a key element of it, which is joint exercises, subject or to become a negotiating element. And by that I mean, what is a military alliance? What you're basically saying is, you know, the military of country X helping country Y, coming to the aid of country Y, and that therefore when someone considers attacking country Y or country X, they're attacking both. That's the concept of a military alliance. Now, how does it work? It only works if the forces of country Y know and understand and exercise together with the forces of country X. I mean, that's what exercises are for. They're not there to threaten anybody. They're simply there to exercise, to practice, as any football team does, I mean, to practice how together they will deal with the threat coming from country Z. That's what it's about. And so when the North Koreans say you need to suspend the exercises, they're saying you need to degrade the purpose of your military alliance. And I find that a cynical effort by the North Koreans, and one that we should resist at all costs.
No, Ambassador Hill, I do not agree with you on that.
Good, I'm
because
pleased.
for us, alliance is an instrument for peace and stability. Alliance cannot be a goal in itself. Therefore, in other words, why you're doing alliance with us? Of course, to promote American national interests, that's one thing. But another thing
I'm
is
talking about the
promote
exercise.
Peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. If there is a temporary suspension or scaling down of ROK U.S. military exercise can bring a new momentum for peace and stability, why can we consider? Why should we exclude all the certain important, agenda?
I've monopolized this discussions long enough, and I know there's much more here, but I want to take it to the floor. We have a lot of questions actually coming in on the little iPad here, but I want to give precedence, yes, a lot of hands to those who've trekked here to the Asia Society. Can we pass a mic to, why don't we go down? For some reason, all the questions are in one row here. Morgan, anywhere you want to first hand the microphone, I leave it to you. And if you can say who you are, and please keep your questions brief.
I'm an attorney. Concerning possible benefits that the U.S. can offer to North Korea, what does the panel think of the possibility of a promise to avoid a nuclear first strike?
There's an easy one, maybe.
The United States has adopted no first use policy, particularly since 2010 nuclear posture review. Therefore, even though the military assumes the first use principles, but in reality, no first use policy has been the foundation of American policy. But North Korea has been politicizing that issue. That is a real issue. But I really hoped that President Obama would have given speech today on this no first use policy, but he didn't do that.
Yeah, in this point, I agree with Professor.
Hallelujah.
And because I support that no first use doctrine,
Right.
because through that we can ask North Koreans to do that as well. And also, anyhow, we need to dismantle North Korean nuclear weapons there, but we don't give any reason for developing, because U.S. already committed not to use first to North Korea. So they don't need to develop their own program there.
Okay. Maybe you can just pass the mic down. Yes, sir.
Yes, Jonathan Nadler. You talked a lot today about the delivery systems and the sophistication of the delivery systems, but you haven't talked at all about one possibility which perhaps you can comment on in terms of closed doors, what they say about it, and that is an unstable regime selling, they need money, selling a nuke to an undesirable entity. How does that stand in terms of concerns today amongst Western powers?
It's a great question. We've gone through a whole discussion, not talked about proliferation.
Oh, I think it's been up there for some time. I mean, proliferation, you know where the fissile material comes from. If there's some bomb if there's a nuclear explosion in some other part of the world, we'll know if it came from North Korea. And I think we've been pretty clear about the consequences of that.
And that's good enough?
The whole point is this: no more nuclear testings, and no more nuclear materials, and second is no better, or smaller, lighter, standardized, and third one is no export. But given past behavior of North Korea, we never know. There is a real concern. The particular American concern should be no export, non-proliferation. Therefore, there got to be concerted effort to really watch on that issue.
The last man in this row. Yes, sir.
Hi, Key Park. I represent Korean American Medical Association. I direct the North Korea program. I find Professor Moon's comment very intriguing, especially about the reduction or scaling down of the U.S. ROK military exercises. It's in light of the fact that the North Koreans have said it explicitly, if there's a scaling down or cessation, temporary cessation of these exercises, they're willing to suspend their nuclear testing. Can you comment on that, Ambassador Hill?
I know they've said it. I don't consider it enough. I mean, to degrade the ROK-U.S. relationship, to degrade the defense relationship, in return for which they will suspend testing for a certain amount of time, and it's only suspended until it's not suspended. I really don't see the value of it. I mean, one of the key issues for us is to be demonstrating to the ROK that this relationship really matters, and we are prepared to exercise to practice the alliance. And you know, there are alliances all over the world, but the ones that work best are when, you know, the troops know where they're supposed to go, they know what airport they're supposed to use, they know what the fuel situation is, they know what the units are that they're supposed to work with, they know what the lines of defense are. These are all matters of exercise, and I think the only regret I have is we didn't do that in the spring of 1950. So I really don't consider the idea of degrading our alliance with ROK as a useful element in moving forward on denuclearization.
So I have some different view on that one.
Okay.
In the past, our so-called the foul eagle military training and whatever. In other words, I would say the past since the 2010, partly it is a North Korean fault. Our ROK-U.S. joint military exercise and training have been upgraded, sometimes mobilizing strategic, bombers, Korea battle groups over the Korean, peninsula and etc. Therefore, in other words, we can normalize ROK-U.S. military exercise and training as a way of bringing North Koreans to negotiation table and urging North Korea to, suspend its nuclear testing.
I'd want to take one question because it's interesting and it picks up on something that was said before. This is from Alicia in New Jersey via email. I believe Clinton's camp made a mention that negotiations with the North Koreans would follow the same contours as U.S. negotiations with Iran. Does the panel see that as feasible? Now, I'll take it a step further. Is it a completely Pollyannish, naive thing to think that direct U.S.-North Korean negotiations are possible, likely? How much would have to happen before I ask that of anybody?
I'll just briefly say one of the key differences is the Iranians are not claiming an interest or a desire to have nuclear weapons. Now, of course, we have great suspicions that they are, but they have made very clear, at least on a declaratory basis, that they are not interested in developing nuclear weapons. North Korea, by contrast, very proudly states that they are interested in nuclear weapons. So an Iran-type solution would require North Korea to say they're no longer interested in nuclear weapons. And they did say that in 2005, but they're not saying that now. So I'm not sure. I think it's kind of apples and oranges at this point. I think the idea of sequential taking of steps is a good thing in negotiation, especially when there's a lot of mistrust there. So sequential taking of steps, but at the end of the day, North Korea has to do away with their fissile material and their bomb-making material, and so far they've been unwilling to even discuss it.
But I guess a question then arises with all these, because there's a reasonable answer to every question about a potential opening or something. And yet,
let me add at this point. Yes, as Ambassador Hill pointed out, there's a qualitative difference between Iran and North Korea.
right.
Iran does not have a nuclear bomb. North Korea has a nuclear bomb. There's a fundamental difference. Iran is a still pluralistic society, no matter how limited. North Korea is a really goddamn totalitarian regime. There's a fundamental difference. But one lesson we can learn from the Iranian case is American leadership commitment. If John Kerry can spend 10 days, 10, 15 days in Geneva dealing with the Iranians, that can make a big difference. American leadership commitment is the most important lesson we can learn from the Iranian experience.
I agree.
Okay.
Wow. That was an applause line. Anybody else in the room? We have questions in the back. Let's go to the back if we could. The lady, right. Thank you.
Mr. Mueller, I work in crisis communications.
That's a good field for this, yes.
My question is for Yonsei. It hasn't been mentioned that these interesting candidates that we have in America for the upcoming election are taking quite an isolationist stance compared to their predecessors. Were America to really scale back, not just moderately in terms of exercises, but to truly scale back into isolationist policy, how would China be able to pick up that blank space and void left? Because if the current response is America and the Republic of Korea haven't done enough, what happens if we end up with a truly unfavorable American presidency?
Should we ask her to further
There was a
define-
question for Yonsei.
I want to ask Ambassador Hill to answer that question. But if U.S. really scales back its security commitment in Asia, especially in Northeast Asia, I think China's initial reaction would be that China would be pleased because a scaled back U.S. presence naturally in the Chinese dictionary translates into a potential for China to expand its influence. But then if you think about it further, with North Korea having its nuclear weapons and declared to be a de facto nuclear state, then if U.S. does scale back, then what is the chance of South Korea and Japan want to go nuclear if they want to defend their national security? And that would be a very big problem for China.
And that is a stated policy, I believe, I don't mean to be flip, of Donald Trump, is it not? I mean, I believe he has said that he's advocated as an answer to these questions that those two countries go nuclear. Any other questions? Yes, Cynthia Polsky.
I'd like to ask you this one.
Okay, if you can hang on, Cynthia, just 1 second for Morgan to bring you a mic.
I'm Cynthia Polsky. I'm a trustee here. Yonsei, I'd like to ask you a simple descriptive question. What is the daily character of China's contact in North Korea? How much diplomatic presence is there on a continuing basis in Hanyang? And what kinds of discussions and contacts go on all the time?
To my knowledge, Chinese embassy and the Chinese diplomatic corps is the largest in Pyongyang among all the foreign countries. Is that correct?
Yeah, sure.
And to my knowledge, that the working level contact seems to be ongoing and seems to be smooth. Although there are speculations in the Chinese policy community, sometimes they observe on the Chinese embassy website how much mentioning or how many times is Kim Jong-un mentioned. So they also use that to assess the status of the bilateral relations, which may not be the most accurate indicator anyway.
Well, one thing that was said earlier, which we haven't really picked up on, and I know there are many of these, is the level of Chinese frustration with the North. And that was getting a lot of play about a year ago, I think. And at what level, I mean, is not to...
The frustration.
Well, I mean...
Frustration index. Yeah.
Because, I mean, obviously, that they have, for a lot of reasons, they've all been said here, have gone out on a huge limb as the patron and really single ally of that country. And I don't know, Yunsun, can you, or Chris?
I just want to say that it is very significant, and I think everyone in the region, everyone in the world understands the significance of the fact that the Chinese have not invited Kim Jong-un to China. The fact that he has not been invited has a downstream diplomatic consequences.
And for a while, President Park was an invitee.
She's been invited. She's had Xi Jinping to Seoul. It doesn't mean that all is great between China and the ROK, but it means that I think China is doing more with the ROK relationship than with the DPRK relationship. So I think if you checked with the Chinese embassy in Pyongyang today as opposed to, say, 10 years ago, I think there's probably a reduction today in the kind of daily contacts, and I think that has some effect. And but I think the Chinese problem, I alluded to their lack of consensus on North Korea. You know, in the U.S. press, we always say, well, China's worried about North Korean refugees. Probably, but they're also worried about a lot of things. If North Korea were to go down, they would worry about it, that it might be perceived as a U.S. victory, a Chinese defeat. They worry that it would look like somehow China has bet on the wrong horse, that is North Korea, and that this would open up a kind of intellectual debate within China. There are a lot of things they worry about beyond just refugees north of the Yalu. So I think the Chinese are very worried about the current situation and are not ready to make the plunge into a new situation, but they know that the current situation is also not a very stable one.
Let me add just one more point. Chinese foreign ministers send usually vice minister level person to ambassador to Pyongyang, and they send director general level to South Korea.
Downgrading.
And also CCP, Chinese Communist Party, maintains very close relationship with the Korea Workers' Party, no matter how they dislike North Korea. And PLA has regular exchanges with
the army.
North Korea. Yeah. People's Liberation Army maintains very close contact with North Korean People's Armed Forces. Therefore, in other words, even though China is very closer to South Korea, they're having kind of historical inertia of institutional contacts between China and North Korea.
We have time for one more. I'm going to invite the woman in the blue scarf. Thank you.
Fran McLaughlin, my question is United States, China, Japan, South Korea are all governments. And in a government, an individual is constrained by other power centers within that government and within that country. And I only get my information from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, etc. But it seems that North Korea is one person. And how does a government understand and negotiate with an individual who does not seem to have other constraints on a day-to-day basis?
Good question.
I think there are politics in North Korea. I mean, you're correct, it's a one-man dictatorship, but I think whether you're Kim Jong-il or Kim Jong-un, you're evaluating politics. You're thinking, how do people in the army look at certain things, because you want that good relationship within the army. You're thinking, how do your party cadre want things to turn out. So even though it's one person, the one person is evaluating different power centers, if you will. So there are politics in the DPRK.
Threatening enough, so sometimes he's gone to extremes and eliminated some of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't.
But
Anybody else want to?
did you? I think you had a comment before.
I was just going to say, with China's frustration, it has been much more significant than before. But whether that frustration outweighs the strategic judgment about the utility of North Korea, that's a very different question.
That's good. Yeah.
Well, listen, we could talk a lot longer about this, and I'm trying to think now whether I can say that I have that shred of optimism that I was hoping for when we started. Maybe there are a few shreds there to pick up on, but more than anything, I thank you all. I actually thank you for your disagreements. I'm not sure I anticipated those. They made the conversation more interesting. You may watch this, by the way, or tell others to watch. It'll be up on the site tomorrow morning, along with all our other UNGA programming. But thank you all. If you give our guests a hand. Thank you.